Hello everyone, this is Jed Schlackman. I'm a spiritual energy healer and holistic therapist in Miami, Florida. In this video I'm going a little bit further into the topic that I covered in another video regarding borderline personality. This time I'm going to go deeper into the archetypal aspect, how this relates to the nurturing archetype. I discussed previously how a core issue that's in some way connected to what people often label as a borderline personality type is this nurturing issue, where there's a sense that there's a lack of nurturing, where a person feels like they weren't adequately nurtured as a child or they were abandoned. So in some way, that nurturing need wasn't met from an external source. As spiritual beings having a human experience, we all in some way are addressing this particular archetypal concern, this pattern or issue of nurturing, of how we're receiving nurturing both externally and internally, how we are nurturing others and being nurtured by others. And through all these different experiences, all these different roles that we're playing, we gain a deeper understanding of this nurturing archetype, and we find a greater balance where we're able to live our lives in a manner in which we're not really over-nurturing or under-nurturing, where we find more of an equilibrium within ourselves and with our environment, with other people around us. The nurturing archetype is one that relates to the feminine polarity. So it is the feminine aspect of our being that's concerned with giving and receiving nurturing. We can think of the image of a mother nurturing her children. This is done both physically. A mother feeds, including breastfeeding a child, and a mother gives a lot of emotional support and attention to a child. Those are all aspects of nurturing. As spiritual beings, we all have both a masculine and feminine component or aspect. We're embodying both of those polarities, even though on a physical level we may be incarnated in a body of one particular gender. So even a man can be playing those nurturing roles. Of course, if we're going to fully explore the full spectrum of a particular role, an archetypal role per se, it could be useful to incarnate in the particular gender that is most concerned with that role. So for a spirit seeking to fully explore and master nurturing, it might be helpful to have a variety of incarnations in the female gender. Something that's interesting to observe in terms of personality patterns, personality defenses or disorders as they might be labeled in a medical psychiatric context, is that there's sort of an imbalance in terms of how many males versus females might be identified with a particular pattern. What gets labeled as borderline personality is much more frequently identified in women versus in men. And that would make sense if we understand how much it has to do with this nurturing role, this nurturing archetype that is being addressed. Since women are the nurturers, then they would be exploring that role in much depth, going into all the nuances of how we can experience nurturing, both giving and receiving it feeling fully nurtured or not fully nurtured, and so on. Another interesting correlation with this is that women are also much more frequently identified as having some type of an eating disorder, anorexia, bulimia, binge eating, things of that nature. And eating or consuming food, of course, has a lot to do on a physical level with nourishing and nurturing our body, as well as symbolically how we're feeling nurtured or nourished on an emotional level. So there is that strong correlation there as well. It's helpful to realize that this is not meant to pass any kind of judgment on anyone for having any particular challenge or issue in their life. Every one of us is exploring this whole range of archetypal roles or patterns. We all go through various states of polarization or imbalance. We're all working, in a sense, toward finding greater mastery with these matters. So wherever you may be at in your personal journey, it's nothing to feel bad or ashamed about. It's a progression of experience. To find balance, we often do go through extremes. That's part of this learning or understanding process. So be okay with yourself, with where you're at on this journey. It's not necessary to compare yourself to others. We all have much to learn and explore in our human journey. Now, going deeper into the topic of nurturing, let's consider what happens when we're born into a physical body. We start out as this infant who's completely dependent upon its caretakers, both for physical and emotional nurturance. In many cases, that caretaker is the mother. However, sometimes other individuals may be playing that role. There may be fathers playing a nurturing role, grandparents, nannies, other people who are, in a sense, filling in that archetypal role as a nurturer. As I said, that infant or baby is very much dependent upon receiving that nurturance from those caretakers. In many cases, the caretakers are not able to really fully meet the needs or expectations of that child, and this is somewhat relative to the particular temperament of that child. Some babies may require more attention, more nurturing than others, based upon whatever core personality characteristics they have brought into this lifetime. So there may be influences coming from other lives or incarnations, or influences from ancestral memory. The child is not a blank slate when they are born. They have certain patterns already existing within them, which are going to influence the interactions they have with caretakers and other people they encounter in this lifetime. So we can see that there's a lot of variability in how that child will interact with its caretakers and either feel that their nurturing needs are being met or not met. And if those nurturing needs are seemingly not being met for that child, the child can draw on different resources or coping patterns to try to address that situation. A child may go overboard in trying to seek attention from their caretakers. A child may be crying a lot or acting up in different ways to get attention, to get someone to pay attention, either to their physical needs or their emotional needs. And if those behaviors are in some way effective or successful, then it's a form of reinforcement. So that child, in a sense, is learning that they can act in certain ways and receive some form of attention or nurturing that they desire. Caretakers can go to one extreme or another in how they're reacting and responding to a child. Sometimes the caretaker is sort of over-nurturing, over-attendant to the child's cries or pleas for attention. In that case, the child could learn different things from that over-nurturing. They may learn that they can manipulate people in their environment to get their needs met or to have other people, external individuals, fulfill their desires or their wish to feel nurtured. It's also possible for the caretakers to be extra neglectful of a child, and in that case, the child could go to one extreme or another. They might try even harder to get attention, to get those caretakers to start listening to them, to start responding to what they feel they need to be nurtured. Or that child could start to withdraw, to in a way quit trying to get attention from people, having concluded that people don't seem to care about them, people don't seem interested in nurturing or supporting them, and so they may go very much within, seeking out internal resources to receive nurturance. That could be a child who becomes very isolated and withdrawn, who engages in a lot of solitary activities, a child who likes to daydream a lot, to go into kind of meditative states or out-of-body states, to perhaps connect with spiritual guides or some spiritual source of nurturing. That's not bad or good, it's just a way that they may learn to cope with that circumstance. And there can be both a benefit and a drawback to that. The benefit could be that they're developing a strong ability to access spiritual nurturance, to connect with the spiritual realm. However, they're not developing attachments or bonds with humans in their environment, so they're not developing socially in that regard. It's interesting to look at how all these different patterns, personality styles develop. We often very much unconsciously develop different patterns or styles of interacting, and we haven't really stopped to reflect and consider the why or how, the deeper reason for the way things are the way they are. When it comes to nurturing, a parent who has been under-nurtured as a child may actually seek to overcompensate when they become a parent, and they may try to over-nurture their own children, thinking that it's healthy to give that level of nurturing, when in some cases that may be too much nurturing for the child. It may, in a sense, be smothering the ability of that child to develop more independence and autonomy. So we need to be conscious of this if we don't want to go to one extreme or another. We often replay the patterns that we experienced in our childhood in one way or another, either repeating the polarity that we perceived or experienced in our youth, or overcompensating and shifting to the opposite polarity. We keep going through these cycles, sometimes from generation to generation to generation, and so on. And it's up to each of us now in our present time to become more conscious about this so we can find a healthy balance, sort of a middle ground where we're not going to those extremes, where we're not replaying some dysfunctional pattern that we experienced in our youth with our parents, who may have experienced it with their parents, and even going back further into our ancestry. As I mentioned in my other video about the borderline personality type, a person with that personality style will have a tendency sometimes to cling, to grab on to any potential source of external nurturing. So whenever they see someone giving them just a little attention or interest, they start to idealize that person, to think the world of them. Then when they start to develop some type of attachment or bond with that person, it's quite likely that they'll become disappointed or upset at some point when that person isn't able to meet their desire for a lot of nurturing or excess nurturing. Remember that they're an adult now, and so the amount of nurturing that may have been suitable for a child would be perceived by most people as too much, too smothering perhaps, in the adult context. So it's easy to go from one extreme to another, to first idealize a person, and then to start to devalue them, to be hypercritical of them, or start to resent them because they failed to meet your expectation. They failed to provide that high level of nurturing that you felt you missed out on at some earlier stage of your life. When a person finds themselves reacting in a strong emotional way in those relationship contexts, it's valuable to find some type of a spiritual process or exercise to become more centered and calm, and to be able to access the source of nurturing from within, so to connect to that spiritual sustenance, so that you're not feeling so dependent upon the other person for nurturing in that moment. And then as you're able to become more calm and centered, you may develop the ability to observe things from a more balanced perspective, where you're not placing unrealistic expectations or demands on other people, where you're not being hypersensitive to all those external social stimuli or cues, where you're able to be more content and fulfilled just from within your own being. With this in mind, we can also consider an opposite extreme of how people deal with this issue of nurturing, and that's the extreme of a person who tends to be overly internal focused, a person who doesn't really attach too much to other people, where they tend to be caught up in their own internal mental reality, perhaps. We might call this a schizoid type. In this case, the person may have received some type of negative social feedback at a young age. They may have been abused or neglected or not nurtured. And rather than continue to seek out those bonds, those attachments with others, they may have found that they can find that feedback or nurturance from the internal source or a spiritual source, in that case, there may be a similar core issue present where a person has not felt safe or nurtured in their early childhood environment, but in their case, they used a different strategy, a different personality defense to adapt to that or compensate for it. So in that case, the person is not really expecting other people to provide that nurturing. They've kind of already convinced themselves that they won't receive the nurturing from others. They're in a way so afraid to connect to others that they've just kind of completely detached socially and sought out their own internal world where they feel safe. We can look at various personality types in this context of how they have addressed those core challenges, those archetypal issues that come up in our human development process. The borderline type is one that's quite common, and not everyone who has that particular style or pattern will have it to the extreme where it's been recognized in a clinical context. So there may be a small percentage of people who are given some type of a psychiatric diagnosis of a personality disorder, but then there are many others who may show some amount of similar behaviors or traits who exist somewhere on that spectrum, but not to that level or to that extreme intensity where it becomes so noticeable. I hope that each of you who are viewing this have gotten some insight, some ideas from what I've shared. The intention here is to help each of us understand ourselves and others more clearly and fully, to have compassion for one another, and to be able to find tools or resources to help us grow and evolve, to help us become more balanced and whole, so that we can have healthier relationships, so we can have a better sense of self, where we feel more content and confident within our own being, where we can share with others, where we can receive and give nurturing, where we can receive and share love, where we can understand ourselves as part of an indivisible whole, a spiritual essence that is being expressed through every one of us, each of us having our own unique blueprint or pattern of archetypal tendencies. And as those archetypal tendencies interact with each other in this human experience, we have this opportunity to know ourselves better and to master all these different archetypes, all these polarity-based patterns, so that we can be more integrated, more whole, and more capable in our capacity as creative beings. I appreciate each of you for taking your time to watch this presentation. For now, I would want to wish everyone a wonderful day. For those that would like to learn more about these subjects, about holistic health and well-being, spirituality, and metaphysics, I invite you to watch more of my YouTube videos and to visit my website at www.phinsights.com. That's PHINSIGHTS.com.